to Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. I'm your host Avik, and today's episode is one that I'm especially excited about because it blends the two worlds that we don't often think of together. It's high stakes business and creative storytelling. And dear listeners, my guest today is Buddy Howard. So, welcome to the show, Buddy.
Thank you very much, Vic. I really appreciate the chance to be on.
Amazing. So, dear listeners, before we delve deep into the discussion, I would quickly love to introduce you with Buddy. So, Buddy is a mergers and acquisition specialist turned debut novelist. His thriller, The Burden of Evidence, explores the haunting question this: when conscience meets consequence, how far would you go if the justice system failed your family? Yeah. But his story is not just about the fiction, dear listeners. It's all about the resilience, persistence, and using writing as a tool for healing and mental wellness. And over an 8-year journey, he balanced boardrooms with the chapters, financial analysis with the pilot twists, and even skydiving with self discovery. And today we will explore writing as a therapeutic tool, breaking through the self imposed limitations, persistence in long term projects, the role of adventure in the mental wellness, and how business acumen can sharpen creativity. So, I'll not take much of your time. Let's get started. Welcome to the show again.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the chance to be on here. You've got a great podcast, and this idea of healthy mind, healthy life is just a very practical, balanced perspective that I think adds a lot of value to the world. I just think it's a great podcast. I've listened to a number of your podcasts, and you really do a great job of um, offering an opportunity for balance for the people that listen to the podcast.
Lovely. That's really great to hear from you this. And thank you so much for believing on us, on Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, on me, and everything. So, uh, definitely, thank you so much for that. And uh, also, I mean, you have said that writing can be therapeutic, like whether it's shared or maybe kept private. So, if you can walk us through how writing personally helped you during challenging times.
Yes. Great question, and thanks for asking that. And I'll start back by giving you some information, or the listeners some information that I don't share with everybody, but because you asked that question the way that you did, let me respond in this way. Um, Back in 2001, I had the beginnings of a very traumatic family experience happen with one of my family members, and it ended up with it was my daughter, and she ended up going through, I thought, a very difficult time period. And in the process of doing that, I ended up um, sending emails to friends and people like that, and discussing the challenges that we were facing, not only her, but me as a parent. And many of the people that I spoke to or emailed these emails to were saying, gosh, this has been really eye opening. It's been helpful to read this. And this would actually make an interesting book, because you provide some warnings here that many parents should probably know about. And that ended up, my daughter ended up coming through that difficult period well. But what I ended up coming away with was the knowledge and the recognition that writing for me became therapeutic. And not only that, it allowed me to see certain things when I put down in writing what I was seeing with my daughter, what I was learning about myself. It brought a way for me to see things that otherwise I could never have seen. And that ended up turning into a book. It was a book that I never ended up publishing, but it was one that I ended up giving to my daughter. And my daughter ended up at the end of the book, she wrote a letter when I after I gave it to her and she read it. She gave me the letter that every dad wants to receive. And it basically just, said a lot of things that um, were incredibly powerful, incredibly meaningful for me. And in some ways, it was the review that I really wanted. I mean, I wanted my wife to, when she read it, I wanted her to feel good about it. I got another child, and when they read it, I wanted them to feel good about it. But I especially wanted the daughter who this was really about to feel good about it, and she did. And so that book never made it to publication. But as you talk about writing and what writing represents for me, it really represents an opportunity to go very deep in terms of personal beliefs, personal experiences, and taking something away from them. And it's a great question, and that was really how I became a big believer in writing. And my hope is that any listener who's out there, who's particularly those who are dealing with challenging situations, that they consider writing. And let me just say that if you write, it doesn't mean that anyone has to read it. It can just be your own, but it's almost like a quiet conversation that you're having in your mind. And I would just encourage them to think about that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree definitely. So, uh, uh, like, was there ever a point where the act of writing felt more like therapy than the craft?
Felt more like what now?
I mean, I said like felt more like therapy.
Absolutely. In fact, the that first book was probably 90% therapy, Avik. There's so many times I would find that my most profound, writing was when I was really discouraged, and, I would kinda be pouring out things, and, it was a different type of writing. I finally got to the point that I said, this is one type of writing. What I really want to write is fiction, where there is not a lot of not as much personal risk, not as much disclosure of other family members' lives, but which you could nevertheless weave together a story which reflected many of the challenges that you face in life, the conflict between conscience and oftentimes consequence, and doing the right thing, which in some cases, involves a great deal of personal sacrifice or cost, versus, doing something else that may be beneficial to you, but which may not be quote unquote the right thing. And so that was part of the reason that I wrote The Burden of Evidence. This is a story where the main character really, really struggles with what I think is an almost impossible moral dilemma. And I've had readers come back to me and say, it was interesting because I put myself in Paul Nelm's place. Paul is the main character. And I struggled with what I would do in this situation. And several people have said, it really helped me as I'm thinking about making hard decisions. As I read this book, it helped me to think about the way he was going about the process of trying to make this decision. And so that's to me as an author, that's really the ultimate compliment. When someone says, I read your book and I really sort of took it into my own life and thought about things, that to me is kind of the ultimate compliment. So that's a long-winded response to your question, but that's kind of how I ended up getting into the fiction piece of it.
Exactly. I agree. And like, uh, 8 years in serious commitment, what kept you mentally resilient during that inevitable low points of writing your debut novel? So,
Yeah, it's another good question. I think that um, I think it's one of these things where, for me, I always wanted to write a novel that I was very proud of. And there's an expression that perfection is the enemy of good. And what people mean by that is that if you always strive to write the perfect novel, you will never write a novel. And and that applies to so many things, Avik. I mean, you could apply that to almost anything that you do. If you're trying to make it perfect, you'll almost never get it done. And so that was part of the reason it took me 8 years is that I kept striving to get, um, really just a great book, and I ended up, finally getting to the point that, um, I said, "I've gotta get this out, and it's more important for me to get something out." My wife and I were having dinner with some friends, this was back in early part of this year, and I was telling her about the book, the wife, and she said, "Well, buddy, what you need is a deadline, and your deadline is July 4th." So I went, "All right, Susan, my deadline's July 4th." So July 3rd is when I uploaded the book to Amazon. And so, many times what we need when we're trying to do something, to get something done is to have, somebody else help us with a deadline. And once you've got that deadline, have them hold you accountable, and that's a great way to get something done.
Exactly. Very well said, definitely. And were there any specific practices or even moments of adventure that helped you reset your energy along the way?
Yeah, it's almost 2 different questions, I think. One is, were there any activities that I did that helped, and also just sort of practices that I did. To me, it's almost 2 different questions, and on the practices, I'll take that first. Um, for me, it's a matter of when you have a big challenge like publishing a book, to me, it's a matter of breaking things down into bite-sized pieces. So for me, when I was simply trying to get the words down on paper, I would oftentimes start the morning at, let's say, 6:30 in the morning, um, get a cup of coffee. Now, I'm saying that even though you just got through having a podcast about the warnings against having too much caffeine, but which was a great podcast. This Steve Frazier, who you just had, I enjoyed listening to, by the way. But for me, I would get a cup of coffee and I'd start writing, and I would say, all right, I'm going to write until I get, say, 300 words done. And if I did that on a day to day basis, I got more done doing that than probably anything else. Just saying, look, you don't have to write a ton, just 300 words. Make that a goal of 300 words. 5 days a week when you sit down at 6:30, and you can get up after you've written 300 words. So I would do that, and what was interesting would be many times I would write the 300 words and go, "Well, gosh, I'm going strong now." And that would be a day I'd write, 6 or 700 words, which is a pretty good amount. And, so that I think that was one of the things that I did. The other thing I would say that I did was I oftentimes will drive. Well, my wife and I have a vacation home that's a pretty good ways away, and it involves driving about 10 hours. And I drive that by myself sometimes and typically do it in one day. And so I would get in the car and leave the radio off, just drive and just let my mind go. And sometimes I would have there are a lot of twists in this story, in this novel, The Burden of Evidence. There are a lot of plot twists. And many times these twists would come to my mind while I was just driving down the road, and my mind was just kind of on cruise control. And so that was one of the things that I did. It wasn't really adventure or anything like that, but it was just something that allowed my mind to be open to possibilities within that plot.
Exactly. Exactly. I agree. And uh, lovely. I really love that. I mean, one more thing is like, what to say? There's uh, when we are talking about this, you have spent the decades in uh, M&A deals, right? So uh, analyzing the risk and structure. So how has that experience influenced your storytelling also?
Ask that in a different way. I'm not sure if I totally follow where you're going.
Sorry.
Yeah, can you say that ask that one more time? I st
I mentioned that as you have spent decades in M&A deals, right? So how has that experience influenced your storytelling?
I think I think everything that I do, I wind up
Mm.
trying to be observant. And, whether that's in my work in the merger and acquisition area or just day to day living, I think I try to take note of things that I see. So, for example, let me give an example with the work that I do in mergers and acquisitions. It's interesting when you are having one company buy another company. Um, there's a lot of drama, and I would, for example, think about the relationships when you're helping one company buy another company, and I realize have come to realize over time that in, for example, a merger, the one with the power in that one company buying the other company, the one with the power is the one who's most willing to walk away, and that's the one who has the power in that relationship. And in a funny way, it's no different with personal relationships.
Yeah.
And so, for example, things like that, you notice in the business world or just in life in general. And I tried to put those into the novel. I'll give you another example. Um, it occurred
Mm.
to me when I was writing this that uh, truth, whatever truth is, almost has this intrinsic energy to be discovered. And so I decided to put that in there. And that was one of those things that came to me as a result of a conversation that I was having with somebody one time. And they were kind of talking about, a lie takes energy to propagate, to continue. But the truth is kind of there, and its existence almost lends itself to being discovered. And so what I tried to do was to try to put in things that I heard in life that I thought were meaningful takeaways, and I tried to put those into the book. One other one I'll just give you, I'll try to be quick about this. It was I was talking to a guy one time, and he was telling me about this woman in Uganda, and it was true story, and she had her daughter had been killed, and, she trying to her husband had been beat up when the daughter was killed, and, she was trying to earn enough money in Uganda to get the money to pay for the medicine for her husband, and, she was talking to this person, and she said to this person, "You know, I don't have time to grieve. Grieving is a privilege." And I'd never thought about that. But in the book, there's a scene where Paul, the main character, is grieving and he's complaining to the psychiatrist, this is the part I hate, is this grieving process. And the psychiatrist says, Paul, you're wrong about that. You'll actually recover more quickly because you can grieve. Grieving is a privilege and you don't realize it. It doesn't feel like it, but you will actually heal faster. You'll recover faster than this woman in Uganda who doesn't even have time to grieve. And so things like that, I tried to build into this novel, the burden of evidence, and I think that that's one of the things that I tried to incorporate into the book.
Mm. Lovely. Amazing. Great. And what surprised you most about yourself during this 8-year writing journey?
I think the thing that surprised me most, was that, number 1, it was as difficult as it was to actually get it in print, to get it published, because it was just a lot of work, and I, at the beginning of the year, wouldn't have ever guessed that I would actually have a book out at the end of the year by the end of the year. So I think I was a little bit surprised, but the thing that's been most surprising about the entire process has been the connections, the personal connections of people that have read the book. And I've had so many comments from people, some good friends, some people that I didn't know, who felt like they had been affected by the book and who, just as important, came to really like the characters. And that was something that I didn't expect because Avik, I've lived with these characters for 8 or 9 years in my head, and I've really come to like them. I mean, I've come to almost love them in some respects, and it's kind of sad that every now and then I have to remind myself that they're just made up, and they're not even real. And yet, when I talk to someone who reads the book and they say, "I really like the characters and I'd like to know what happens to them next." That to me has been a surprising, reaction that people have had, and it's been a surprising aspect of the book itself. And it's been rewarding because it's allowed me to open up and share and introduce some characters that I've come to like a lot to some friends, and some people that I don't know, but it's just been fun to introduce them to a new group.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing. Amazing. Lovely. Great, but it's a border conversation from corporate boardrooms to skydiving fields, from 8 years of writing persistence to the therapeutic power of storytelling. I mean, you have given us a masterclass in resilience and creative courage. Uh, so if someone wants to connect with you, what will be the great medium to connect?
Probably. I've got a website, buddyhoward.com, and, I've got a place there where they can go and leave comments, and I would love comments. If there are, if there are readers who I mean, listeners, I'm sorry, who are interested in, um, writing their own story, and I will tell you, in my opinion, everybody's got a story, and every story is valid. If there are people that I could help in some way, I'm happy to try to help. And if they happen to read the book or get the book and enjoy it, I'd love to hear their reaction to it and what their thoughts were. So if you go to buddyhoward.com, that's probably the easiest way to get me.
Amazing. Lovely. Great, great. I'll do is, dear listeners, I'll put all the links into the show notes for easy reference. And Buddy, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your journey with us. And to all listeners, if this episode inspired you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that their story matters and that persistence pays off. So, with this hope, until next time, this is your host Avik, and this is Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. Stay resilient, stay adventurous, and never stop writing your own story. So, thank you so much.